But it's half an hour in, so everybody who shows up 15, 30 minutes late is here at the beginning of actual Sunday school, so it's actually just a totally normal day. But got a few guests. Good to see you here. So we're going through in Sunday school the Pilgrims' Progress. This is a book written by John Bunyan in the 1600s. What would you say? It's the second best-selling book of all time. He wrote this while he was imprisoned by the Church of England for preaching the gospel. Funny how that works out, right? The church is putting people in jail for preaching the gospel. Well, it's because that wasn't really the church. At least it wasn't the church doing what the church was supposed to do. It was an institution trying to keep power for themselves. So they imprisoned John Bunyan. And in his imprisonment, he writes this book, The Pilgrim's Progress, to describe the journey of a Christian and to give exhortation and warning and encouragement on your walk through your walk in faith, on your walk towards the celestial city, which is heaven. And so we've been going through this, not studying the Pilgrim's Progress necessarily, but using it as a curriculum to study the Bible. Because Bunyan, on the side of his pages, he puts the reference verses that explain what he's trying to say in the story. So it effectively is a curriculum to help you understand what the Bible says. We are on chapter 14. Who read the chapter? All right. Who can tell me what happened in the last chapter?
Kristen, when he finds the arbor, which is just a resting place, he sits there, is meant to refresh. However, he gets drowsy and sleepy, and he falls asleep, and then when he awakens, it's almost dark, and then in his chiding of himself to hurry and get back on his journey, he starts going, he gets part of the way, he realizes that the scroll that he was reading as he fell asleep fell out of his hand, so now he has got to go back and try to find the scroll because he can't go any further if he does not have the scroll. And so now he's nervous because he had met two people who were turned back from their journey because they saw some lions. So he's worried about the nighttime getting before he finds his scroll. So he's got to go back, try to retrace his steps, find his scroll. Then he gets onto himself because he's going to have to take those steps 3 times that he could have done just once.
That is extremely detailed. So you're paying attention. I'm glad to see that. Yeah, and what were the names of the two guys he meets?
Mistrust and Timorous.
Mm-hmm. Which, of course, Mistrust is the skeptic who's just trying to poke holes in what's being preached to him. And then Timorous, who's scared of the lions, right? Of what the world is going to threaten him with, of what man can do, right? And so why can he not go on without the scroll? What does the scroll do for him?
It's supposed to be his gate to go through for salvation, to finish the salvation. Like he's already received the salvation, but he cannot enter the final gate without having that scroll because it's like an instruction booklet.
I don't know. It's at least not the answer I'm looking for. Why can he not bring himself to go any further forward without it?
Because he needs the word to read and reflect on to give him guidance.
Right.
Comfort.
Guidance and comfort. There you go. And so the scroll Bunyan gives him is for assurance of his salvation, right? You know, there are many institutions, many churches out there who they have doctrines that would make it so that it's impossible to be sure of your salvation. And they say, well, that's what hope really is. You can't be sure of your salvation and have it still be hope. And no, that's not quite right. We know 1 John chapter 5, verse 3. These things I write unto you that ye may know. 5:13. That you may know that ye are saved. I'm butchering that, and there's more words in that verse. But of course, as you're going through your life as a believer, there are times where you'll have doubts, you'll have fears, and you might lose sight of that assurance of your salvation. And so that's what happens to Christian here. And he has to make the shameful, long journey back into, what in our lives would be the Lord's will for us. And that leads us to the beginning of this chapter. What happens in this chapter? Who wants to do the rundown? You can be a little more succinct than Miss Rhonda was. Who wants to do the summary?
Shall I?
All right, go ahead. But you can be a little more brief about it.
Somebody else want to do it? I don't want to take somebody's turn. Go ahead. Okay. The good thing is he goes back, and of course he chides himself, and he's weeping because one minute he's excited to find it, next minute he's upset he's not. But he does find it. He gets it. He puts it inside of his shirt. He goes all the way, and he notices as he goes back on his journey that he's given more vigor and vim, and he's able to go on. Okay, so he finally gets to the area where he starts thinking about the darkness, and he's kind of afraid he's not going to be able to see in front of his face. And he thinks about what the two guys said about the lion. So he comes up to this palace, and he sees these two lions. And then he's deciding, should I go back? Or I get past them? And then he notices the porter at the door telling him what to do, that the lions are changed, tells him the direction to go. Then he gets up to the house. He asks him why he's there. Christian gives him a synopsis of why he's there. Then at this point, he summons for one of the virgin girls to come in to ask more questions to see if he'll be able to lodge there for the night. So then the woman, who is strikingly beautiful, comes out, and she too interrogates him, and then deciding whether or not he'll be able to stay, she goes and gets 3 more of the sisters to question him. And before they offer him, they offer him water before they decide to feed him and let him stay the night.
That is also a very detailed explanation. Thank you, Miss Rhonda.
I won't say
No, it's okay. It's just, I am picky about it because I'm nervous that we won't get through it all. But if we have to split it into 2, we will. But, so let's see, where are we at? So he gets the scroll, and he laments how he spent all that time without, asleep at the wheel, and how not, what would be for us, not living according to God's will for us for a period of time. How much he regrets that, and how difficult, how long it takes him to regain that comfort, to regain that feeling of security that we have when we are living what God's will is for our lives. And I can relate to that. I've had those moments before where I've been, it's a word that we use, and it's a word that's in the Bible, backsliding. I think maybe we don't think about that word all that often. It's kind of what Christian fell into. And now he's back on the path, and of course he sees these lions. And I'm going to ask you the question, what might these lions represent? And there are 2 things in the Bible that are frequently described as lions, and I'm really hoping that you get the right one. What could the lion represent? Yes, okay. I'm just making sure that we didn't say that Jesus was, as Lion of Judah and all that Jesus is scaring people away from. So I'm glad that we got the right of the 2. The enemy, which would be Satan, and of course Satan's minions, which are the secular world system, the world, the society that rejects Jesus. We'll go ahead and hand out the verses now. We'll start on this side. Brother Charles, 1 Peter 5, 8 through 9. Miss Gina, Romans 8, 38 and 39. Julia, Mark 4, 39 and 40. Amy, 1 Peter 5, 1 through 5. Miss Sue, Titus 3, 10 and 11. Pastor, 2 John 9 through 11. Yeah, you don't get a 2 John verse very often, do you? I had to dig deep for that one. David, Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. Miss Rhonda, 1 Peter 4, 17. And Miss Gaby, James 5, 13 through 16. We will definitely not make it through all of these, but I'm just giving them all out now because I don't know how far we will get. All right. Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. All right, so talking about the enemy compared to a lion here, or portrayed as a lion here, and we see that in 1 Peter 5, 8 and 9, Brother Charles.
Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeing whom he may devour. Whom resist steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world.
All right. And then, so you can see the comparison there. You know, the devil, he is out there. You know, media has this portrayal of the devil as though he is in hell. And he's, you know, either he's in hell chained up or he's in hell ruling. And neither of those things are true. It is true that he will be chained up in hell for 1,000 years once Christ returns to earth. But right now, he is in the world. Right? He's the prince of this world, the prince of the power of the air. Could speculate on what that means for hours. And he is looking to destroy. And those who he can't destroy, he can definitely hurt. He can definitely make them doubt their salvation, their security. Lead them into being ineffective for Jesus Christ for a time. And that's the lions had that effect on Christian almost until, he almost turns back like timorous and mistrust. But what stops him? Well, how does he find out that lions are chained? Because it's dark out, right? He just hears the lions.
The porter tells him.
Right, the porter. And he tells him that the lions are chained up. And if he keeps walking along the way, if he keeps in faith, they can't do anything to him. And of course, I put a reference there in Romans chapter 8, Miss Gina.
For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord.
All right. So, when you look at that and you think, those lions, which are the world or the devil or whatever's out to get God's faithful people. They can materially frustrate our efforts, but can they affect your salvation, your security? Can they if you're keeping your eyes on the prize, can they take you away from that in any way? Can they take you out of the love of God? No? I see a lot of people shaking their heads no, so I appreciate that. And then, of course, the exhortation of the porter. And the porter is basically a gatekeeper, right? We'll get into this idea of gatekeeping in a little bit. It's become a sort of modern term, gatekeeping. The Generation Z uses it a lot. But I think it's a good word because it's particularly relevant to the chapter and for us. But the porter, what's his name? What's the name of the porter? It says his name. Blink and you'll miss. Read right over it. Hey, Andy's got it. Watchful, right? He is standing there, he is looking out, and he is watching. And he's opening the gate for the people who ought to be brought in. We look at this idea of the porter, and he says something to Christian. When he sees Christian about to walk away, he asks him a question. What's the question he asks him? There you go. Funny you would answer that because you have the verse. Go ahead.
Mark 4:39 and 40. And he arose and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith?
Of course, in this situation, in the boat, the disciples, because they didn't, until Jesus was resurrected, right, they didn't fully get what all he was about. They thought he was a political leader. They thought he was going to overthrow Rome. And so this idea that he is the Son of God, he is equal with the Father, he is God made flesh. They still don't quite get it. And so the exact scenarios may be a little different for Christian because he's been saved at this point. He understands. But the warning still applies, or rather the question and the encouragement still applies. Why is your faith so weak? He's received all these promises. He knows the right way to go, but sometimes things are just scary. And I can't blame him because that same thing happens to me sometimes. I have a perfect opportunity to bring up something about the Bible at work or whatever because the topic just demands it, right? And maybe I just don't because, I don't know, afraid of being judged or made fun of or people getting annoyed with me. And maybe some of you experience the same thing. I wouldn't doubt that that's a common experience. So the porter lets him in. Christian, the lions are chained up. They can't affect him. He comes into the palace. What's the palace called? What's the name of the palace? Beautiful, right? And he's invited in, and he meets with this porter, this gatekeeper who's named Watchful. And Watchful asks him a few things. What 3 or 4 things does Watchful ask Christian? He asks one thing before that, actually, if you look at the paragraph above that.
Where was he from and where'd he go?
Right. And then his name, and then 2 other things. No, 1 other thing.
Why is he so late? Because it's fixing to be sunset.
Right? And, of course, he asks Christian's name. Christian gives him his name, but Christian isn't his given name, isn't his birth name. What's his birth name? Graceless. Now, doesn't that describe every Christian before they were saved? Grace, this idea of saving grace, right? And how do you get saving grace? Other churches, other institutions would say it's by the sacraments. Baptism, communion, or they call it the Eucharist. Confirmation, which we saw in the example of formalist, that these things will save you. But if we read our Bibles, that grace is obtained through what? Salvation. Well, grace gets you the salvation. Say that? Faith, there we go. And of course, faith keeps Christian along the path, keeps the lions from being able to hurt him. And we'll get into the description of the palace itself. So it's got a porter. So let me start out before that. Finally, after so long, Christian meets some friends. It's been the last, 6 chapters, just meeting time and time. They're the angels, but we skip over those guys because they're not people. That sounds rude. But in terms of people on the road, he hasn't met any friends since the last time he saw Goodwill at the gates. And it's been a while. So now he's finally at the Palace Beautiful. He's got somebody at the front door watching, inviting him in, asking him about himself, encouraging him. There's more people inside we read about at the end of the chapter. And they're friends, and he enjoys some community. I'm going to ask, and I think there's a right answer here, but it's a little bit of an open question, so I apologize if it's not immediately obvious. What is the palace supposed to represent? The church. Yes. All right. So it's not heaven, right? Because you're still on the road. The celestial city is still ahead. It's the fellowship and community of the believers in Jesus Christ here on earth. So the study guide here goes into that in more detail, and I'll read a few paragraphs from it. They write, "It is felt, not by a few in our time, that religion is a private affair and distinctly personal matter. Bunyan would answer quite differently, as would the Bible. No doubt there are personal aspects of one's faith in God, but these can never be divorced from the larger corporate setting which comprises the local church and the body of Christ. Bunyan very carefully positions this stately palace, called House Beautiful, at the very top of hill difficulty. The way also runs up the hill difficulty, but past the stately palace. It's along the way. Not through it. This is a very important distinction. Finally, he plants roaring lions on either side of the way and just before the palace. The point is this, that the House Beautiful is the visible corporate fellowship of God's people in any locality. True biblical conversion creates a spiritual relationship among God's people, unparalleled by any fraternity club, any lodge or association this world offers. As Paul says in his letter to the Romans, and he says Romans 12:5, and somebody turn to Romans 12:5 because I know the study guide uses New King James Version, and I don't want to read right out of that. Romans 12:5.
So we being many are one body of Christ, and every one members one of another.
All right, so the Christian church is unique in all respects from any other organization. Helping other believers out of dire circumstances and difficult situations, out of right motives and right reasons, is part of the exceptional practice of this holy people. Last paragraph I'll read. Secondly, the way to the celestial city goes up hill difficulty, but also goes by, not through, the House Beautiful. Not exclusive to the 17th century, even many sincerely pious in our generation are banking on the church to get them to heaven. Whether it be church membership, formalist, church baptism, church attendance, or church duties, there is a confident reliance in these to produce an everlasting entry into the kingdom of heaven. These and other works are not what God requires of us. And then, of course, the lions. Bunyan was persecuted heavily for preaching the gospel, for assembling people together to hear from the word, which is what the church is. And the Church of England, which was a political institution above all things, it was corrupt, imprisoned him for it. But they didn't silence him. He was able to still encourage people and preach to people, even from a jail cell. Kind of like Paul. Most of his epistles are written from jail, aren't they? So, very interesting. All right, so if this is the church on earth, the palace beautiful, what would you say the porter represents? The gatekeeper, watchful. Who does he or what does he represent? That's what I'm leaning towards. It's not explicitly stated in the verse, but that's kind of what I'm leaning toward. He's protecting the church, the palace, from people on the outside. And, because if you get someone like a formalist along the way who's going to start telling people that, well, being in the palace, being part of the church, officially being a Christian, air quotes, big time, is what saves you, well, he's got to watch out for people. And then he's got to bring in people who are along the road. He's got to invite them in. Of course, we all have this responsibility to invite people in who are along the way but don't have that help that Christian community gives you. So I see that, and I would back that up with 1 Peter 5, 1 through 5.
The elders which are among you I exhort. So am I also an elder, and when
All right. And so I feel like that kind of lines up with what the porter is doing here, right? He's in there for it. He's selfless. He's not doing it for filthy lucre, for personal gain. I like to think that that's a pretty good description of our pastor. Yes, I'm going to gas you up and compliment you. But it's true. I think that you set a good example for us, and you make an effort to exhort us and to educate us, and also to welcome in people who need to be here. And then we've got this woman. I wrote in my notes that it's his daughter, but I actually think I read into it too much. I don't think that's stated. But he says, one of the virgins of this place, who will, if she likes your talk, bring you into the rest of the family, according to the rules of this house. So, what's the woman's name? And what does discretion do when she meets Christian? Right? Ask some questions. Figure out who he is before bringing. Right. And so, in that sense, I'm not going to say who because it's not really a who. What does discretion here represent? It's more of a duty, I would say. Yeah. Right? Bingo, that's the word I was looking for. Wolf, right? The Bible is full of warnings for the church. Grievous wolves have crept in unawares. That would be Jude, verse 4. Well, not grievous wolves, but certain men crept in unawares, talking about all different kinds of heresies, liberalism. You can do whatever you want. You're going to heaven, it doesn't matter. Or legalism, Judaizers, right? You have to follow the rules to get to heaven, and all kinds of other things. And in fact, not just the pastor, but everyone within the church who is a mature and faithful believer understands what they read in their Bible, has a duty to exercise discretion when somebody comes in, and if they are saying things that they shouldn't, if they're teaching things which they ought not, to reject them, to not be all buddy-buddy with these people. So you can still evangelize these people, but if they're going to come in and start corrupting things and leading people astray, well, I think we can look into that. We can see what the Bible says about that in Titus and 2 John. So Titus 3:10, that's Ms. Sue.
You want 9 through 11? Or
What did I tell you? 10 through 11. 3:10 through 11.
And avoid foolish questions and genealogies and contentions and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and vain. A man that is an heretic after the first and second admonition reject, knowing that he that is such is subverted and sinneth, being condemned of himself.
All right, and then in 2 John, and we're just going to kind of cruise through these because we are close to the end of my notes. We can finish it all today.
2 John 9?
9 through 11.
Whosoever transgresseth and abideth not in the doctrine of Christ hath not God. He that abideth in the doctrine of Christ, he hath both the Father and the Son. If there come any unto you, and bring not this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him Godspeed. For he that biddeth him Godspeed is partaker of his evil deeds.
All right, and so of course, when people come into the church, we want to invite them in, give them a pat on the back, say, welcome in, why don't you take a seat, hear what we have to say. Evangelize them, because that is one of the biggest ways that people come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, is that they're personally invited to church. They see the transformed lives of believers within the church. But there are people who know better, but still, or who ought to know better, but still continue in false doctrines. And they sneak in to try to corrupt things. And so every one of us, we have a responsibility to exercise discretion. And like it said in 2 John right there, I mean, what's the warning? What we ought to do if there are these if somebody is totally stubborn, immovable in their falsehoods in their lives. Supposed to invite them in? We're supposed to...
Assemble together.
That's not... Okay, well. No, you're not supposed to bring them into the fold, and that's sort of what discretion represents here. You can evangelize them for sure. You can talk to them about what the Bible actually says. You can warn them about judgments, but you do have to exercise discretion to protect the flock, to protect other people who might come into the church who need to be here, and that they won't be led astray into this same person's falsehoods. Very briefly, we will go over the church, or the Palace Beautiful, which represents the church, the physical community of believers on earth. It serves a couple purposes. So we're going to go through these last three passages, and I want everyone to listen and tell me what purposes you see the church serving based on what you read. So David, Hebrews 10, 24, 25. Everybody listen.
Let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching.
All right. Do you see any purposes of the church? Any purposes of gathering together in here? Any benefits? What do you see?
Lifting each other up.
Right?
Giving each other hope.
Lifting each other up, giving each other hope. I see that. How about 1 Peter 4:17? Miss Rhonda.
For the time is come that judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of God?
All right, so what is one of the purposes of the house of God? Judgment. Holding each other exactly. And of course, this is not the judgment unto destruction that the Bible talks about for those who die in their unbelief, reprobates. But the chastening judgment, the restorative judgment that God has to convict us of how we've not been living for Him, kind of like Christian experiences when He realizes He left His rule behind, left His scroll behind. And then let's go for James 5. This is the last one I got. James 5, 13 through 16. Who's got that?
Is any among you afflicted? Let him pray. Is any merry? Let him sing psalms. Is any sick among you? Let him call for the elders of the church, and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith shall save the sick, and the Lord shall raise him up. And if he have committed sin, they shall be forgiven him. Confess your faults one to another, and pray one for another, that ye may be healed. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much.
All right, do you see any purposes, any benefits of being part of a body of believers?
Yeah, you come here to get prayer, like we do, pray for people that are
Mhm.
sick or have problems and troubles. And did you share your problems?
Yeah.
You'll be able to.
There we go. And so I'll just finish it up with one chapter, to shun fellowship with believers, to think you don't need to be part of a church. It's to even to be under the authority of a pastor, it's to reject some of your best allies, some of your best friends, your best helps in your walk as a Christian until you get to heaven. So I appreciate everybody being here for this. It encourages me and tells me, especially since all of you have been reading and memorizing Scripture, we see some of that this morning. It tells me that Bible Baptist Church, at least, is doing what its purpose is. So that's the encouragement. That's the chapter. And chapter 15 next week. Can I ask Brother Red, will you close us in prayer?